Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Dune. This film came out in 1984. It was directed by David Lynch. Dune is one of those fascinating Hollywood stories where there was naturally a lot of anticipation and interest surrounding every aspect of production. Many great directors were considered for it, everybody from David Lean to Alejandro Jodorowsky. The book, of course, is an iconic piece of literature, and yet, unfortunately, it just didn't come together. It has a very mixed reputation with viewers. It's known for being a train wreck by, I think, the majority of people. David Lynch has been very vocal about how he considers this like the low point of his career, and he was really unhappy with the end result. And yet, despite that, the film has such a weird cult following among a lot of fans. So it's interesting to see why certain people perceive it so negatively and other people really, really like it. It was David Lynch's adaptation of The Elephant Man a few years prior that got a lot of critical acclaim, and that's what really kind of plunged him into the Hollywood big leagues, as it were. Hollywood realized with that, oh, he's not just some kind of surrealist midnight movie guy, he can be taken seriously and make very dramatic works that are Academy Awards friendly. And I know at this point he had offers to make other really big movies that could have made him a lot of money, including Return of the Jedi, but he chose Dune, and part of me is happy about it. I've never read the books, so I can't comment on that, but I think that if you're watching it from my point of view, I think if you're trying to follow the plot as it is presented in the movie, good luck with that. But if you treat it like, you know, I treat a lot of David Lynch films, especially later in his career, you just treat it kind of as it's just surreal, weird fever dream of an experience, and you just throw logic out the window, you can actually kind of lose yourself in it. It's actually not so bad at times, and it can actually be an experience worth your time. That's very unique. I will talk about the good things first, because I do think there are a lot of really good things about this particular film, and I think they're overlooked, or they go unnoticed overall. First of all, the production is spectacular. The aesthetic. You really see that a lot of the film's budget went towards that, particularly in the first and the second act. The sets and the costumes just have this like massive, grandiose sort of feel to them. And I honestly think that if a movie, like, you know, if Dune was made today in this way and it had these kinds of costumes and these kinds of sets, it would hold up brilliantly. I like how it's, you know, very royal and kind of rooted in tradition, as well as a sort of otherworldliness, but it also has this kind of 1930s Art Deco look to it. It's like remnants of the past, but given a sort of modern touch with a hint of the exotic. But it also has this like 1980s like rock opera cheekiness to it that I really respond to, and it's just it's an interesting combination. But overall, Lynch just likes to have a very retro dated quality in all of his films. Even with this movie, the end credits are just, they're kind of hilarious. They remind me of like the old film credits, like from the 1930s. It reminded me of the opening credits to Public Enemy in 1931, where it's like James Cagney as Tom Powers, and he's like standing right there, and it's just kind of like, wait, what? It's really awkward. The scope of everything is tremendous as well. I really miss that matte painting look for the backgrounds in movies, and you know, now obviously they mainly do CGI, but I wish that people would bring it back in some way. I just think it's more artful, has that more painterly, abstract look, and it's more personal because it's done by human hands. And the soundtrack is kind of fire. I mean, it's Toto, and then you've got Brian Eno doing the main theme, and it's like, yeah, bitch. It's very shamelessly 1980s as well, but you can't help but crack a smile during it at certain points. The cast is amazing as well. Kyle MacLachlan, of course, this is his first collaboration with David Lynch, and then he would go on to be immortalized in a lot of different projects that David Lynch did. And you've got everyone here from Max von Sydow, and then Brad Dourif, and Patrick Stewart. And I can't forget that Sting is in this film, and he is just a marvel of a man in this film. I mean, his eyes are all bugged out, and like his chest is all oiled up. He just takes out his sword and strokes it like he just wants to have sex with every object and person in the room. Masterfully homoerotic and strange and hilarious. It's one of the greatest performances of all time. I've always really responded well to the way that Lynch writes female characters. I always have, and I think that that's actually a really perfect for Dune, because the females ironically have a far more integral part in that film than you'd normally be used to in a lot of sci-fi works, and it's that subversion of those expectations. The sisterhood has this sort of divinity around it, you know, like a maternal mysticism, yet at the same time they're terrifying, you know? They're very fierce and very intimidating, but yet an order to them as well. And I think all of that was captured really beautifully. And the people of Arrakis are not condoned or looked down upon as you might expect here. Typically in movies, especially Hollywood movies, especially of the time, if you had like a race of people on a planet and they're all addicted to a substance, you know, they're probably going to be portrayed in a way that is condescending to them. Maybe treating them as primitive or simplified or whatever, but here, no, they're treated with a sort of respect. They are warriors and survivors. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot here that makes sense for David Lynch, even like the spice and everything, you know, like you'd think that would give him a chance to really do a lot of the things he's comfortable with, you know, a lot of trippy sequences that would be right up his alley. With his films, there's already naturally just a very cinematic, murky, rich sort of eeriness in his movies, very rich in color and imagery and in feeling, and all of that works with Dune. But I also think that Lynch is so engrossed in his own cinematic philosophy that when he tries to make a movie that is not his original idea from start to finish, where he can kind of deconstruct the cinematic language in the ways that he normally does, it just doesn't come together fully, and it feels a little bit disjointed. And with this movie, I know there were a lot of issues with it, but the result is that it's really blotchy. You know, there's a lot of good things, but there are a lot of bad things too. And at times the special effects are absolutely amazing. And then at other times they look really cheap and slapped together. Perhaps because of budget constraints. I know that the production started to lose money as it progressed. But then again, I also know David, and he loves that kind of cheap look to special effects a lot of the time. That's kind of part of his shtick as a filmmaker. But with Dune, it doesn't work so much. For Lynch, dreams and film have always had a bridge between them, almost like they're connected by an umbilical cord. And he's made a career of searching the origins of these like Hollywood cliches and these subliminal messages in order for us to be able to connect more strongly to the internal aspects of art and to ourselves. And when you're making a movie that is really like a big Hollywood production, a lot of those elements are going to kind of have to exist in the backdrop, and the story is going to take the forefront. It can't be the whole concept of deconstructing the narrative, and I can't help but think that Lynch is just going to be more comfortable being able to work with a story that he's written himself, so he can really play with it and deconstruct it and mess with it in all the ways he wants to. With films like Mulholland Drive, you know, that's a film to me that's like completely his baby, and it completely embodies his cinematic philosophy as he always intended. And also, I know that there was a lot of tension at the time between Lynch and the studio when he was making Dune, because it's clear in the final result. The whole film narratively is a mess. It's just really hard to follow. They do like voiceovers and things like that to try and gloss over the novel's main ideas, but it's just so crammed into a short period of time that things end up feeling really rushed and unclear and convoluted. Many of the characters are also undeveloped, and that second half of the movie is just, it's so chaotic. But you can see David Lynch's self-awareness as a filmmaker creeping in at times, especially when the movie it's pushing to the point where it's right on the edge of farce, where it's kind of dabbling in like the homoeroticism and the incestual nature of things. And all that adds to the sort of psychedelic nature of the movie and blending those concrete ideas. But I think that the studio just had a different vision of what they wanted compared to what David Lynch wanted. So there are parts of it that are really evocative, and then other parts of it just they come off as awkward or silly and just a bit botched. And yes, David Lynch, like, this really makes him sad to talk about it. I get the feeling when I watch him in interviews. He's just very bitter about the project, even to this day, and it's been decades. But you know what? We learn from failure, do we not? When everybody expected something and it ends up failing and not meeting those expectations to this extent, I really think that that can give you a perspective and make you realize truly what you want out of life and what you want in terms of your own identity as an artist. And I think the fact that he went out of his comfort zone and did something like a big budget science fiction film, especially David Lynch, he doesn't really care about science fiction that much. I feel like that made him realize, oh, okay, now I know where I truly belong. And after this movie, he vowed to never make anything again unless he had final cut and total control over the editing aspects of it. And then, you know, after this movie came out, 2 years later, Blue Velvet came out. So there you go. Then after that came Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive, and were those easy to make? No. And, you know, did he have struggles with money and all that? Of course he did. But we have all these amazing works now that are absolutely quintessential David Lynch. It's that experience-driven experimental cinema that made him the legend that he is. So yeah, with Dune, I get it. It's a mixed bag. If you don't like it, and I know people that really, really don't like it, I sit there and go, yeah, no, you're justified in that. I can't disagree with a lot of the reasons, but at the same time, I do find there are a few interesting pieces, a few interesting fragments here and there are parts of the film where Lynch really shines through creatively. So despite my criticisms, I actually think you can enjoy it honestly, if you do more what I did. When I first watched this movie, I was not sober. Of course I wasn't sober. And I had no idea what was going on. So I just kind of experienced it. I let the imagery and the feelings speak to me and kind of wash over me. And I let a lot of the strangeness and the awkwardness just kind of exist and flourish in my mind. And I don't know, even if it might be half-hearted at times, I bought into it because I can't help it. I'm biased. I respond a lot to David Lynch just as a director, his aesthetic, all of that, regardless of what he's doing. But if that doesn't sound like it's for you, don't watch it, because certainly you're not going to get much out of it. But I think for Lynch fans, at the very least, it is worth your time to at least just see, you know, that one film that really hurt him, the one film that he considers such a failure, and see what you think of it. But that is my review. Thank you all so much for watching. Here you will see all of my Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute, the link for that is below, and all my social media information is below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.